bring in the light of others to bring in the light themselves. We are embodying light by the light of Christ, by the light of the sun.
We need echinacea in our lives, and they magically had the seed from wherever germinate over here to then grow the echinacea in that small quantity. Because plants just come to you when you most need it. And something outside of ourselves can like perceive that, oh, these people are going to need this. They see the bird's eye view of life, whereas we're like in life, you know, so they can see who needs what. And so they already plant the seeds before we're even like trying to cure in this whole thing. You know, I just feel like that's probably what's going on. That's also true when I say it.
Now that's natural intelligence.
Yeah, it is natural intelligence. Exactly.
In the mindset, for it to be a functional choice, the intelligence spoke beyond time itself through the energies of knowing the flow of how things are going to play out based off the branching of the energy.
The pattern.
That at some point, the instance for this place to have not only every single one of the plants I needed, but also the echinacea.
Yeah.
That's essential. So if I ever needed to, an entirety of my healing journey can take place from this land I so happen to arrive in. So all these plants, which has grown prior to my arrival, prior to any purchase of the land from any family member, prior to any of that altogether, nature is intelligent enough to act in its own right. And I didn't even have an injury when I moved here. Yet still, the journey I went on, what I learned, including each one of these medicinal plants, including each one of these uses of how to not only practically understand it by the principle, by the symbolism, and even by the fact that they were the first plants when learning, I got to get the first hands-on. And like even mushrooms over the years, I probably photographed and explored and encountered so many mushrooms. Same with the plants and medicinal plants, each and every time. So to capture all of that prior, and then to know that that same work of art has blossomed into a study, blossomed into me learning how to utilize the benefits this nature brings to our beings and bodies, even just to aid the body, we are working with it to embody more being. It's the ability to arrive at the place when we need to at the right time.
He's more than Falbearer. That's ridiculous. And isn't that just natural intelligence on a deeper level from your own intuition or inner knowing to do certain things because you're resonating with how that is something you like to do in life. You want to photograph mushrooms. Who knew what it would lead to today? You know, who knows what it's going to lead to in 10 years from now? Like, you know, especially about mushrooms, because mushrooms are so fascinating and so much more to learn about that they hold so much more power. But
it's nature in general.
Exactly.
Well, the fine-tuning of your vehicle is like the efficiency of your functions, your potential to be, the potential to last. When you take care of something, not only will it perform just as well later, it will also be taken care of to be addressed at the right place at the right time. Because look at us as human vehicles. You can use a vehicle for whatever you want. There's more vehicular damage in this world than you see weapons outside the weapon industry. But that's purely just a means of genocide. If you look at the industry of just like individualisms, we're looking at how that expresses out by the vehicle we own and choose. And I think like in today's day and age, you can use a vehicle for many things. You can use it to arrive in nature, to explore more nature. You can use it to connect to a community, to bring outside exotic resources local where you live. I think it has the opportunity to work just as much, but we can also drive in the wrong direction and use up all our energy and fuel by choice. Now, is that intelligence being natural, or is it us natured with intelligence, lacking our nature, yet still operating logically by intelligence, driven by emotion? So we're disconnected by nature, but we're still our field rolling, committing to where we're desiring, where we're drawn to, where we're expected by, just like the moon. Placement of the moon is aware of magnetic pullage, and even magnetic pullage is this idea of capacity of being to one's nature. So as we love one another, we attract them to us. So there's more of a magnetic pull. And as we allow ourselves to interact with the world, we're not always doing that to every single thing we pass. But the capacity of all of nature to being nature, even if you are not performing that task, majority of nature, through its natural intelligence, already is. So you are tuning back into natural intelligence. We have the capacity to act vehicularly. So we're identifiable, which is why we're in I am. We can disconnect. We can embody to limit a split, a boundary. We can have healthy boundaries, but we can act. I think earlier we heard someone say, we're the experiencer to the experience. And that's true. We're not 100% functioning as these functions we are by body, by nature, by this natural intelligence, but we're partaking. So we identify with our attachments, our possessions. First, even the whole zodiac breaks down natural intelligence by the communication and expression of light through the parameter of direction, because each direction clarifies, like, for example, let's say you're magnetically drawn towards the north. That means you're pulling away from one direction, and then this east-west mechanic is more of a spin, a spiral. And at the end of that east-west connect, you get that turn. That turning in itself is because there's an energetic flow. When you have an energetic flow, that's where you see the solar system. It's the mechanics of light. And when we're communicating the mechanics of light, we're using light as an example. So we look at constellations. When we pull in the stars, when we pull in astrology, we're using a tool.
Right.
Now, even if we're embodied in being, but we have the potential to be more embodied, we also have the potential to make better decisions to improve our body, to improve our life, to improve not only your daily living. And I think the more intelligence you can apply to your daily, the more you're going to show an example of natural intelligence, adaptable, yet its ability to perform still comes from the nature available. Now you have two sectors. For us, we have ancestors. We have a genetic connection that has come to this point. So it has had an experience. It too, not only is pulled by the waters it remains of, but it's pulled by the constituents, the physicality, the material, the building blocks of communication pass through much like an experience, like a memory. We had something happen to us. We carry with it, even though it's not with us. We do carry on. And that's us genetically. So we're working and pulling from a set just as much as we're embodying a set. Now, the disconnect comes from conditioning that has performed itself over years of those.
And a program.
And through programming, exactly.
That's the key word, I think, just program, because we're not naturally, I feel like, wanting to do some of these things that we've been programmed to naturally want to do. That's how we've been disconnected from nature.
But though we can program, you can have core programs with core functions that don't perform as well. They perform poorly. They don't get the job done. Or they introduce more hassle along the way than functionality. I think where we're heading in the context of AI, we call it artificial intelligence, but AI is just as much how much do we apply the I? How much of ourselves are we applying? If we give it a data set, now can we allow it to perform a function by performing introductions of new data sets? Just like we're performing new actions in our lives to change our outcomes, to introduce not only the navigation of where we're experiencing different perspectives based off the angulars of light of our sun, the idea of Christ itself, the whole idea of even the Kabbalistic breakdown. I see a lot of people talk about how these originated in beings, but in reality, they were nothing more but tales of how they came about to be. But these sectors are still no more than when their arrival, regardless of tale. So when you look at what actually is and what is prior, you see that I'm confident to understand that through programming, you can modify power. Through programming, you can introduce malware and viruses to pull off functions. You can collect additional data. Look at the government. They put in so much effort to collect digital data through the acts of whatever they claim. But those functions, they're introducing malware. The majority of incidents and events that is programmed into the broadcasting initiated through these sectors. These sectors didn't even arrive into power until the sectors that dominate that power had to discourse what they title wars. A war is just a rival of energy. But they've accumulated so much energy in certain sectors, they're intelligent. But are they operating out of natural intelligence? There may be a higher intelligence, but every single one of the sectors of how I understand light and the concept originate prior to any of the teachings we have today. So they're not just the principles they say that they originated from. The idea of Christianity, the idea of Christ, the idea of Jesus, the way that that's pulled into us by Christ itself, the light being into the extent of a point. We are connected to the sun, and that connection, how much we honor that to perform our being, is how much we are taking care to operate through the nature. But when you're driving a vehicle, you could be on autopilot. You could also listen to things. You can multifunction. But if you're familiar with the path and how to perform the tasks, we have the ability to cut away to divert our energy and attention. But when we're autopiloting too much, we do miss out on a lot. There's a lot to segment away. For example, I personally sauna. I like to sauna because it helps clear a lot of lymph channels. I like to do work to perform and improve my body based off the incidents. I was unwilling to make choices sooner to avoid. But due to mistakes, I learn across the way to get even more into who I am by restoring who I am, by understanding who I am, what nature is, what nature I am. So when you have these moments, I personally feel that with podcasts, people can be meditative, people can plan their days and understand how to improve their life mentally, or they could just take a break and operate even simply just the way of listening to nature gives us more of just the ability of experience. But when we have segmented choice to perform an action, let's say your vehicle is in a body shop, but when your vehicle sits in the driveway too long, when it sits in general, it accumulates.
Yeah.
It's stagnant. It's not only...
Has to rot away.
Exactly. It is exposed to the elements in its surroundings. And when those elements are exposed even more due to, let's say, you just happen to have acid rain, or the environment introduces a chemical or detergent or a deterrent that takes away your available ability to perform as your nature because it degrades your nature. We have acids for a reason because we need to break things down so that we work to make them malleable. Because when we alkalize, we make it certain to make sure that it can break off and crystallize. But when we want it to be more flexible, when we want it to be more acidic, we have the ability to introduce not only light, but the ability of light itself through consciousness to emit itself enough awareness to then direct whatever that nature is by its constituent, which is why we have fractal layers of existence. So consciousness embodies itself. consciousness then decides to perform as itself by its nature. So that's us. We are bodies of nature, but our participation in it can come from the world around just as much as it can come from the nature and the constituents 100% of us. But me talking to you, me operating in this world is co-creative. It's co-existence. We are not alone, but we have unique natures. I was discussing this with someone else earlier too. The idea that they have a gift to work with these sectors of the senses. They can perform functions to make this really well because they have the experience of that nature to focus in and to really improve those sectors, not only for themselves, but to the fact that they can do that and make it look easy is the very nature of a skilled art. So when I look at artists themselves, they're creating, and the way that they can just conduct themselves with ease is an art. The idea of knowing the nature, functioning the nature, and exposure to the nature is a multi-level ground. So now let's introduce the element of the outer world then. So if we're coexisting, what is coming in and how much are we performing out? The idea of me as an artist is that I have a way to work with a unique understanding of elements, a unique way of nature, while also operating, multiple functions. As a polymathic artist, I not only have multiple interests, but I have multiple performing functions as seen through astrology. Now, linking back to astrology, astrology brings us the ability by its own right to understand how they perform and function. You can learn about electromagnetics, which is a science from astrology, just by deconstructing the philosophical nature of how each relates. But you can also look at the psychological, mental world, how we're constructed together. Just as much as you can divide the elements up into the light above, as below, as commonly expressed by the state through the century of publication and discussion of the subject itself, we're advancing. Even the idea to learn earlier today, prior to the idea of Vedic astrology, no one titled that until the 60s. And then even before that, the joyteas, the way that joy even is that, the idea of joy boy, the idea that we can embody, the idea of Christ, the idea of all these things, they have old principles. And then we look at the elements of the symbolism of why we identify those principles. Why do we see these sets of symbols? That's natural intelligence applying itself. When we look at the symbols of reality, you look at those that claim the land that has built beautiful architecture, but the effort to build and construct the concepts, the effort to allow that to become something through the functionality of the ecosystem is of nothing but an art. And the ease to see that erect itself, not only locally, but in other sectors all over the world, shows me the natural intelligence of potential and the optimization of the individual at that time progressed not only based off its availability of understanding these principles, but the availability of understanding not only who we are, but the astrological mechanics. The astromechanics tell us everything just as much about our vehicles, because we look at vehicles and light separately, when in reality we're of the same constituents. When you understand a vehicle rusts because it's exposed to the water, to the elements that then oxidize based off the elements built. Most vehicles today introduce a plastic counterpart because they want to change the way that they personally are spending what they perceive as an exchange of value. In reality, it's a perception. Once you see that the world outside of us is existing, our entry into it, our participating into it, can only conduct itself based off us through the body. So our elements, our vehicle, our mental acuteness, our way that we can perform and function, even our availability of where we can perform various tasks. I know as a polymath, we have to do so much. And by we, look at you, not only as an individual, as yourself, is exploring the idea of not just one craft, but you're not tied to one thing. You're always exploring different forms of art. You revisit things, but the way to continuously explore something is a mastery. Your exploration of the different elements allows you a learning curve, an experience that we seek, where that teaches us. And that's why you can see North Node tells you what kind of experience, as you are placed more towards a Sagittarian end, this pool of the post-galactic center fluctuating energy, you've gained a momentum of interest to be pulled, to learn, to have that. But opposite of that nature, look at astrologically, in opposition, we're met with Gemini, the splitting. So if we have this source, this coming together of all of this energy spiraling, what does that mean? Opposition of it. We have Gemini, this separation, this idea that we can exist as two, the idea that we can be of both nature, the idea that we can also embody not only the experience, but as the experiencer, just as much as we can be the mental person and the one choosing to say and act our body. Even the communication is just a sector. That's why we look at the elements, the way that we are emitting, connecting in our energy, and even the way we feel and take in. The idea that extroverts just put a lot of themselves out while introverts take a lot of the world in is nothing more but how are we operating. But that operation, when we understand our nature, our potential, and our capability for an individual, they may be able to perform the same task as someone who is a master, but their task of performing it well takes a different avenue when they're exploring the art to understand the values that they can learn from the lesson of actually doing the work versus the commitment necessary to master and refine the art for the sake of the time and place the master was born to be in. So when you're looking at the ability to work with not only what the master has brought to us in general, and even in the sake of art, nature itself is the one true master, source, the one true master, Christ, the connection to come into being from the light. Us as a reflection physicality is a reflection of the light capturing light to embody itself, which is why we see these anglers. Once you have enough form through the function, like triangular connections, give us the ability, after the opposition of light, we see this parallel of light from Sagittarius to Gemini, this wholeness to come to learn to know into the horizon of potential, to the division to go both ways and potential of this and everything in between, which is why when you see the astrological way of how we come into this point, you're seeing the same elements just coming in different directions. But as we work and operate in the way of a spiral, our clock through it is more of a breathing in and breathing out. And because of that, they have different expressions, different arrivals, and different interactions. And because of that, we're able to start introduce divisions based off patterns and parallels. So light as a structure, as a reflection, we reflect in a lot. When we're too susceptible, when our vehicles, for example, are susceptible to taking in a lot of magnetic energy. For those who have what is called essentially a Cancer moon, even a Gemini moon, even in these sectors, give us the ability to work with a majority of magnetic fields around us. And as someone like myself, as a Gemini rising, arriving into this world, my physicality of what I call the Bhati is this embodiment of light that arrives through this rising sign, acting out through each of these forms of light, giving us the idea of how light is expressing. And by the time it comes full circle once more to fractalize, by then, you can literally go the same way in reverse and see how the world is coming to you, which makes so much sense to us. And what is nothing more between that but the eye of us, the light itself, the embodiment of our experiencer, witnessing the experience. So to us, if we're not participating, if we're choosing to forfeit responsibility, we have the right to bear arms. Whether we're bearing those arms is the capacity to do so. Our masculinity is just as much a principle as just a femininity of knowing our extent of our field of potential. You start to divide and lose these boundaries of potential. You're trying to segment people closer and closer together, limiting the potential of what can be and what is truly. Now that brings us back to the principle of the mentality principle. We can have programmings just like you said. We can take in the world just like I'm experiencing. We can then look out at the world, connect ourselves not only to one of the available memories to us, but to the way that we uniquely have accumulated and connected into the world to take in something that we then recontextualize ourselves into our mittens and self, our heart operating, we get to allow that experience to project the light of this expression through a participation of ourselves through these instances. So natural intelligence, for us to have echinacea on this property, to arrive in the instance to know, is the idea of synchronicity. Our synchronistic nature is natural intelligence operating on the factor beyond us. There is a way that we are arriving just as much as the arrival of us is coming to be. When I have balance in my chart through oppositions, I can learn to communicate between these two sectors of potential. My art chooses to improve itself by the drive, just as much as I'm willing to create within the sector of light. I understand these through not only my nature, but we are studying nature to understand the nature of reality, the nature of our participation. I know at this time, I'm choosing to be embodied. I'm choosing to operate through this world because that is why I choose to be embodied. I was discussing the other night how we can be so interested in the outer world, in the outer potential of the extent beyond this. And yes, many of us are participating, building up the resources to reconnect, to remember, to re-embody, to act in the potential of life. But many of us can be misguided. Many of us are figuring out who our light is and how we are. But when we come into the world through generational conditioning, there is a risk of disconnect. There's a risk of programming. There's a risk of programming by those who brought you in. Initially, you had to bring in not only a division through the discourse in the last century, but then you had to introduce a system to keep them on, a system to adopt and replace the idea of exchanges of unique potentials. Through the isolation of the sectors, through the isolation of the perception, where generationally, through the context of displacement. Look at all the immigrants coming into New York. I was born in Brooklyn. A lot of where I came from around the world. It comes from all these sectors that were in tune to nature, from the location. They've spent generationally connecting with, communicating with, and understanding. The displacement loses your connection to the culture because you're adapting to a new language, a new custom, a new way of the world. Like accumulation is the way how something of the extent is coming, how it has arrived into those moments, how much has it magnetized into being. And the extent of all of that, we are looking at it as the potential of how much have we taken on too. There's programming, yes, but we break away. We choose better. We make better habits. And by those habits, the reflections of what you bring into the world will show that. You will come back to also be responsible for the sectors we neglected. Many of us neglect the self. Many of us neglect the responsibilities. Many of us even fail to understand because we're unable to perform, because we're unable to give ourselves the proper, let's say, energy, nutrients to give the building blocks to the body. I, for myself, am on a path to restore not only the body to protein. I was once the ability to perform so well physically. Now, through the state of the world, through the state of mistakes, through the state of choices, acting upon perceptions, we understand that the world can be just as much placing a multitude of energy into deception. But breaking post-deception of the world is as of an ease because you watch and witness how it has less and less effect. How someone can simply point something out is all it takes for truth to restore itself, just like us to come back to knowing who we are. That's why nature is so beautiful, because it gives us the opportunity to bring us back to something that is true.
In your light, and then others will stand in their light instead of being cast upon. It's shadows that are being cast upon us. We're just taking it as that's light, but we can shine our own light and then we illuminate it from what we've been given in the way, like you're saying, you got to remember.
And even then,
within,
we're remembering ourselves. We're remembering by the act of experience. We learn. Many of us are wise prior to embodiment, yet our ability to work.
Does something do with like reincarnation in a way at all? For certain people to be walking around like NPCs and other people to be walking around the same age and same generation and even generationally.
I would say you got cycles. Cycles permit the ability to show us the ability of how much light can be present, how much we can embody a potential based off the potential that is participating. Okay? So now that's what we understand as astrology. We're looking at those. So now we look at the embodiment. We are the building blocks. The way that we participate our light comes from us. Yes, we need to embody our light. And then as our light, we bring in the light of others to bring in the light themselves. We are embodying light by the light of Christ, by the light of the sun. Yes, there are outside forces that can communicate to us, but are they just light and embody? But are they the physicality of what we see as reflected light? No. They're the embodiment of light as purity, just like we are the light of the body in the dream, just we are the light of the body of the astral soul. Astral is just the astral. It's the way that we are asked, the way that is the extent of that coming into being, coming into a point. So we have us, as you say, reincarnation. Now, through us coming to a point, multiple cases, we're improving our natural intelligence just as much as we're improving the intelligence provided by our nature through the performance and operation to do tasks. Now, if we have different sectors of Mercury, right? How and when we are performing with the light, coming into that light is important, which is why we utilize astrology to see who we are and how we are. Now, by how our Mercury is expressing itself over the period of time of development, of exposure, of experience, how well we harmonize with our natural potential, our natural intelligence. I have a natural emotional intelligence of the field. I can connect and feel, but I can then, through my opposition, use this Saturnian and Mercury connection to then verbalize and create structure to communicate what that emotion is, placing the psychological analysis of that on point of emotional deconstruction. But at the same time, too, because of my sectors, the ability of my emotions in itself to feel and be happy, to be in my moment of being. I admit myself to just purely be in art ever since I was a child, and I've always committed to that. My ability through experience, I've spent so much in what would be called a meditative state, purely just through the acts of creation. I love creating for the sake of seeing what is potential for creation. Now, creation itself seeks these ideas. So the longer creation itself comes to be, the longer potential that we can be. And if we are seeing the potential of light itself, that in its light by who we are, by the light of our source of sun, this light, that soul, then is experiencing different flavors of the extent of the light it's receiving. So everything has to come fractal. Everything has to come in. And even if the message through our Mercury nature is delivering itself the idea based off its experience, that in itself is emitting that of the light of our soul, our heart, our sun, the way that emittance is to be, are expressing itself, us as ourselves, is an inversion of the light participating as a dream, while we, as a light, can participate as a dream. It's fractal because, like I said, in the chart of astrology, it goes both ways. We are emitting into the world just as much as time is happening to us. We are in the middle of that, true to what is. As we are embodying that is how much our light is creating form. For my sectors, the trines, the oppositions, the balance, co-align with natural balances, natural trines. Trines themselves are how elements communicate. That is the most strongest way you build structure. That's why we have common patterns to recognize elementals, the way energy moves. Oppositions gives us the way to create an experience. One is an experiencer, one is the experience. But when two of these oppositions exist in your own being, you then allow those to work together. Through the harmony of them communicating, finding that middle ground, each of them performs a unique function. Now, look at reincarnation. We are given different abilities of light through different aspects. If natural intelligence is choosing to work with not only the ability to work with when the light was, where the night was constructed, where the light was constructed, and then perform the light into that construction for that extent forward. We choose from those moments the participation in each moment. That's why we're able to witness it. We are witnessing the light of the sun purely as the light itself of the sun is emitting and processing the functions. And the functions of light are the planetaries. The flavors of light are the zodiac. A zodiac broken down can be done in different methods. The concept of a zodiac is why we have a Chinese zodiac as well as the Greek zodiac. And even if we look back at these sectors of the Greek, the letters themselves, they've created systems at the peak of when they were at the Kali Yuga, because they understood not only the ability to embody as an art form the structures and symbols, but then we witnessed a Mayan documentary last night on the architecture, the way that we operate to align with the natural light, the natural intelligence, embodies systems, embodies ideas, embodies way we function so that we arrive back into the light of the potential that created such. We arrive back at the potential to go not only beyond what brought that into being, but then to transgress it fractally. We're continuing by choice of participation. And through the witness, through our participation, and through the natural intelligence understanding and working with how to harmonize with the different sectors through its moments of, we understand them as cycles body. But when you look at them for what they are, it is the dance of the sun, experiencing itself through the dance of the central solar sun, the inversion of what you call the galactic center. This, we see just as much the Oort cloud in our own sun, this magnetic field extension, the capability of how much our sun, our soul, our heart has a field is beyond just the body. If anything, it is so much beyond the body that us beyond the body and self-embodied should be recognized. Mm-hmm. The thing is, as we recognize as external, we're arriving at these conclusions in body. Right. Just as much as a Renaissance can bring art into being so we can embody the being, we are awakening to the concept through the principles available to us. It is not that the art itself is an act of Christianity in that of Leonardo da Vinci. Even the name itself, the embodiment of putting that name to the sector of what this brought into the world, is the achievement of defining for us, based off the principles and symbols, how this performed the light. Which is why, when you look back at the Greek itself, broken down, Greek. Not only is it the generation, but it's the continued direction of that generation into energy. And that fractalized into additional energy to then branch upon itself. As K is nothing more but nature, K is how things are breaking and dividing. How a branch grows is how we construct the K. It is the way that it is bouncing off. But it's not just a reflection. But the thing is, when we look at a reflection, it's the perception of where are we observing the light. Now, let's bring this back to astrology. I noticed we are experiencing Saturn retrograde, Neptune retrograde, and as of last Friday, Chiron retrograde. And as of coming into next week, we're experiencing Mercury retrograde for the month of August. Now, the idea of retrograde is this field of the light of the sun, the soul, is experiencing these particular functions relative to itself. And we, as the reflection in form coming into being, we, as the earth, the energy extent, it has to come into being, which is why it comes into being to turn to cycle. So why we have the four directions. We have to turn magnetically, but we have to arrive. But we have to spin, which is why we see it as a wave of light. We're essentially just a wave, but we're performing the wave from the light available. That might be a more complicated subject, but take it back for a second or two behind us, even that we look at how we generated these systems, even if we look at natural intelligence, And even if we look at the participation in it, we are embodied through reincarnation. Even if the concept of us embodying and then we're connected to something beyond ourselves may be our familiarity to be embodied. So our connection to that is how much are we operating on the natural intelligence of the intelligence of nature? How much are we familiar through the experiencer, the nature itself, that we are then bringing back availability of our past life expertise, our past life effort to then embody it in a way many of us subconsciously do. Because if you look at the way that the light comes in, what comes into the light is just as important, which is why you have the outside sectors. The extent of what we can perceive through the visible eye obviously ends in Saturn. And we call it that because it's the SA. It's the transference of what turns. That's why we have a turn, you know? It's a continuance of that energy. It's what comes when you're turning. It's the momentum of that wave, that pool, that curve that you see coming out of a galaxy, what we, visualize as that little turn, that spiral would be essentially that. Now, we are the spiral of the sun, emitting at a form, coming to being based off the relevance of where we're placed. Now, our placement relative to the sun has its functions, which is why we have our planetary. Our embodiment through that is working with how are we familiar with this. Many of us are going to be drawn to nature, but many of us are going to be born of nature, and many of us, through natural intelligence, are choosing to embody because of the availability of what we can do and perform at this time. We are just as much choosing to participate because of the experience available to us, just as much as we know at this time the potential of us taking a participant is giving us a lesson, giving us experience that we're going to take in lifetime is beyond us. But because of our embodiment, even to look at the Chiron that just went retrograde, coming back to that sector, these retrogrades give us ability to reorient. When a retrograde motion occurs, we perceive it as it's going in a different direction. But in reality, it is the way that we ourselves are continuing in a direction as it is itself is existing perceptionally. So in reality, it hasn't changed course. We are just relative in direction changing course to the light. Now that's a reorientation. That's why by the time it goes direct, we are in a better understanding of this sector since we left. We're revisiting it to know not only this angle, but it's cool. Now, if this sector is perceiving us that way, the light itself, it is pulling something from us. If we're an embodiment of this light, during a retrograde, we're pulling this energy out. So when we have a retrograde in our chart, there is a extrovert aspect to our field that you may call is this retrograde. In my case, it's a Mars. So in my eyes, the way that this operates is not fully meant to be deconstructed, but in the instance of the present with us, we're looking at these retrogrades that are in motion. But when this retrograde functions on us, we are pulling the retrograde out into an extroverted point of view. But if we're embodied, that's technically an introverted form of light. So now we're perceiving this light as the experiencer. We're perceiving this ability to pull out this light so that we can see it as an experience. We can understand this perception to then reorient it. So that by the time we do reorient it, we're putting itself better. So we're lenient. We're not getting this Saturn being retrograde. Means we're not getting such restrictive, compacting concentration, of this dynamic to long-term structure. Like, for example, if it has to arrive at a certain place at a certain time, that is structure. Now, that is because it's on a momentum of direction of expectancy. Now, what we perceive as perceptional retrograde, this gives us the ability to reorient not only what we're restricted by. So we're not going to hold that back, but the ideal of what those restrictions were are now giving us the potency to now reconstruct not only our wounds from Chiron going retrograde, but now through Mercury, by the time we end August, we're going to reshape the way we're communicating our wounds to be better healers. And the wounded healer, this chironic energy, is the chi, but it's the iron. It's the way of that chi concentrating in itself. It's the way of the concentration seeing this into your form. It is the way that you're finding yourself into being control on. So it's your chi having a direction continuance. So this energy, this way of you being, the concentration extent of being, which is what chi is, that has to give us the ability to experience something so that we know it so well. It has continued on so well through our experience that then we become what is known as an expert. So through each lifetime, each of us is given a chiron. And that's important as well to help us in each lifetime, not only to operate better through our nature, by nature, but to operate better through light, by our light. It's very fractal. And that is all coming from source, doing the same thing to sort out its experience. So we're contextualizing through participation of the potential. But our potential to participate gives us the ability to choose and embody at certain times. This reincarnation gives us then the understanding to know that, yes, through this natural intelligence, you can have these psychic understandings, we can call them, the way that we are perceiving potential magnetized, potential drawn, potential from the available intentions, you know? Right. That is the true extent of what our future holds. That's why it's always changing, because even the ability to perceive the current intent then experiences a future intent from the awareness of conducting the communication. You bring and introduce in new information, you change the way that you're operating, because then you're given guidance. Like, let's say you are available to know what the weather is, gives you an idea of what to perform when you're trying to do these long-term bigger days where, let's say you want to go on a nature adventure.
Yeah.
And you want to connect with a bunch of other people or have an event. Those desire nicer weather. We cannot control these functions, but we can understand astrology. Now, we can't control the functions of us during those astrological weather. But through that astrological weather, we can act as examples of principles that then we help each other remember. You know, right. We are of a family in a sense because we participated of this nature together. Yeah. And not only by our bodies experiencing our nature, we always, through our nature, have the potential to just come into being of who we are. Not by the programming, not by the extent of the currents, not by that by which we're connected to what came from even. Sometimes we simply can just be to sort it out. But that knowing of who you are, the embodiment to stay true to that nature, takes nature aligning to give you the principles and angles to do that. But each of us can embody those skills to express that refinement, even if they may not be perfect. The sectors where we do choose to perfect and participate refine potential that operates in a co-creative environment. A co-creation is something where you don't know exactly what is going to happen. But when you understand intent, when we have the ability to be aware, intent gives us the ability, just like astrology gives us idea of what's happening to us. Intent is how we're arriving at. And that is what we're pulling in, magnetizing, communicating as an energy. If we're humming something, if we're hitting simply even just a tune, a tone in general, and it emits itself, something that's capable of that same tone or tune can pick that up, and they will harmonize and communicate. Even with the distance, we as instruments, as tools, as bodies, act as nature through the light. But our participation, us embodying to be, is how much are we choosing to embody in all the availability of our body? How much have we operated to be in our body? For example, if we can even put a little bit of ourselves in our body, then we can start to make better choices, eat better, do better, improve the body. You improve your body, that shows the extent of your own earth, the extent of your own experience of being.
Yeah.
We choose to harmonize in nature. The less we take in nature, you can see that is nothing more but programming. And those who choose the program are of the same light we are. So they might be of the nature, but where they're choosing to continue their energy into the parameters comes from a different light. But we, as flavors of the various constellations, are embodying our current soul light.
Right.
Now, what flavor we're having in that light is why our soul is connected to embody different connections in different lifetimes based off the I behind the I, the experiencer of the experiencer, which we are unable to embody experience, but our embodied experience is still a witness. This is why you can't measure the ability of extent of being versus the measurement of being's extent of the okay. So the idea of consciousness is the extent of the field emitted. Okay, so that coming into being is why there's a chis in cons. So the chis is us continuing into being as emittance. So that is just how much of our field are we becoming through the field, which is why the concentration of light as a supernova of compacity is just extending the element of the light based off the instruments in those moments. The higher concentration does not exclude the light availability in its form of waves and extent. So that light to accumulate mass, accumulate its emittance is relative to, like, let's say our soul relative to the source. And as we get closer to the source of our light, we then harmonize, become more of our light, and that embodies more of us into our being. So our soul would become more embodied, just as much as our soul would embody more of source. So it's fractal. And what we are seeing in our world today, what we call AI, the extent of intelligence, the extent of I, the extent of the connection of us, we're now embodying principles and functions through collective processing. That's very Aquarian. Yeah. When we're divinating based off the uniqueness of the individual flavors of light that we're experiencing as light, that is definitely Aquarian.
So you're saying this is like the Aquarian?
I don't want to say it's an age of Aquarius. I'm saying these Aquarius principles are showing us a fractalization. Now, the thing is, to arrive at Aquarius, you have to become into being as Aries. Aries is the identity. It's the recognizing of the self. Then you need a Taurus. You need to connect to a world where you understand that you are responsible, the experience and the experiencer. You need to know that not only is there something whole connecting into, but then you can be of this world. And then as the possession sense comes to being, our senses are connected to the world. We're attached to the world. Now, Gemini gives us the ability to see the parallels of these connections. Now, when we look at the transference of the field of these connections, we're starting to feel and have emotions. But then when we bring that all together, those first four sectors, it's why the elements can repeat after a trine. Because now you built something. You built these four functions that now can create light. That's why we have Leo embodying the parameter of energy through the field. That is Leo, shine, the ray in which it emits. Emittance is itself, the heart. So then, this then has to contextualize. Okay, now that we have heart, what counts? Because that's the idea. When we have this Virgonian sense, this reflection of identity, of what generates the field, we're choosing, okay, now that we're embodied, what do we want to do about it? How do we improve it? Do we improve our health? Do we look at the details? Do we say, all right, we see that this is going well. And even if this is on autopilot, this could use a little more focus. This could use a little more attention because we want this to count for the future. Now that we're embodied by the light, we need to do something about it. And that's where we're coming into being. Now, that is the first sector of yourself. After that point, we're embodied. Now you're seeing the reflection of the external world at this. This is why we come into the seventh sector, the seventh house. When you're coming to the seventh, you're starting to see the reflection of how you are to the external world. That is going to show you how you're operating from yourself. This would become your first polarity in the sense to who you are, which is why then this reflection of the self gives us the ability to see the reflection of how we're coming out of the world. So now we're connecting into the world, which is this Libra sense. It's us, the parameter of being. How much is that coming together to contain you? In which case, we then build a momentum of Scorpio. So Scorpio, scorpionic energy brings us to the underworld. This is where the galactic center is. This is a pulling in of change. This is a way of looking at what we aren't willing to look at, because this is pulling in to the under, what we aren't willing to look at, what we're looking at under the hood. You know, that this gives us the ability to know what is. This gives us the ability to see the extent, not only through the way that we are connected to another person, we're polarized by our connection to the world. You know, we've had so much of the world that we're curious of what is outside that, which is why you see that interested into paranormal, ghosts, Halloween at that time. These sectors are not only emittance of us becoming familiar with these energies that we got to find an outlet and expression, that we ourselves, even if it's subconscious, even if it's structured, even if it's individualization of the bastardization of the principle and elements that it originated from, whether you look at a pagan or the idea of Christ and light in itself and the embodiment of being, even if you take away that, we still participate in the way of interest in the sectors, just like the seasons did. So now that we've had this scorpionic sense, we've gone into the underworld. This is the leaves have fallen. Now we are entering what would be called the Sagittarian aspect. Now this is the extent. If Scorpio was the continuance of concentration of being, emitting itself to what's on the surface of being and emitting, you know, we're connecting to that. Now Sagittarius is this extent, just like Saturn, Sagittarius, the SA is the transference extent. So we're already in motion, you know? So we're giving ourselves into this generative being, which is the I. Then you have this concentration of TT. This is to a point, fractally to a point. So in which case, that's why you're coming post-galactic center. Not only are we the galactic center, we're the galactic center of the light of the point. We're the point of the point, which is why we're concentrated to know of what is. Now that's why we have a yes, because once we had the that Aries is just like Aries, like I said in previously. Once we have the Aries, we have an identity, we have the continuance on. So now that we've had the point of the point, once we had the fractalization of the generation of being, this is why we learn. This is why we go into expansion. This is why we see the horizon. The extent of being is being. The extent of knowing what is. And how does that continue on? That's why we want to know more. That's why we want to learn more. It's not just what is, it's what can be, what's potentialized. In which case, once we understand potential, we develop systems to build ourselves to there. That's why we get into Capricorn. Capricorn then concentrates that participation so that we develop systems. But its direction of that participation is why we're intelligent about it. We're taking what we process from Sagittarius knowing, the knowing of being, the knowing of how we operate and what continues on. Now that we have all of this behind us, since the identity of who we are, how do we apply that? Now this Capricornian sense gives us our structure, but this gives us majority stake. This gives us the ability to autopilot. This gives us the ability to start to develop systems, like we're developing the way that we're constructing technology today is through this structure of electrical systems based off crystal magnetic principles of light and how they function. Through the calculation of all that, we perform tasks. That's Capricorn, but this is Capricorn to the extent of electricity, which is why you get flavors. But now, once you have this Capricornian, this corn itself, Capricorn, is why you have the mountains and the lows. It's the idea that these valleys, the knowing of what potential is and what the potential to low is, knowing now that we see what the potential of the horizon is, let's get the highest high and the lowest low. Let's make that happen. Let's see what that mountain is. Like, let's see what that ocean is. So now we're doing the work, which is why it's very earthly. We have to do the work in Earth. We have to do the Saturnian structure in Earth. We have to do what we need to do in Earth. Now we're of all this. So Sagittarian is like, That's why we are what we are based off the galactic center, because of this nature. Now, because of this, we set a system in Capricorn, and the core is this continuance onward. Anything, it's like on, O-N, but with an R, gives it more, it's like the direction, it's the ray. So it's the continuance of that ray itself. So we want to make sure that O, our remittance, is continuing on. That's beyond our generation. That's why it's long term. That's why we're developing eventually the idea of how we're connected is in Pisces, because we develop a system. We need to have a system. You couldn't have religion if it wasn't systemized, but you also couldn't have programming if we weren't systemized. We can be exposed to programming on the device that is Capricornian, just like technology itself. So I witnessed someone said that they were experiencing ads and they did not like that. And I'm like, the idea is that in this day and age, based off the nature, we ourselves have to conduct our own choices to respect the privacy we want to feel we deserve. The life we want to feel we deserve, we have to make an effort too. And if we're not taking an effort to learn how to do that through this world, currently, we're only going to be bombarded with more. Now, as we're arriving to these systems, we hit Aquarius. It's associated with networks, uniqueness. This is the first opposition to you becoming light. You become light. So what's the fractalness of that? What's the opposition? The collective. This is all of it together. This is what happens when you have all these individuals coming together. Just like when you have this concentration of this galactic center emitting itself to divide into Gemini. So we are looking to see now how this Aquarian aspect of identity is expressing itself out. Just like the east of light is expressing itself west. We are creating function and form and direction of the collective, which is why we have this spin. At this point, this is why we have Capricorn prior to it being about career, while Aquarius becomes about social. Because once we have systems, our participation in it becomes through the collective connection. The aqua is called what it is because it's the extent Q that comes. Q is this emittance of the field, but the dash in it brings us to the connection that is coming through the connection to external to the connection. The Q is the chosen idea of Mars. It's the Q is the retrograde of your own field being observed. That's why it's the quirk. But Aquarius through the aqua is the extent of that. So it's what's coming out of the emissions. What is the idea of all of that? Now, Aries brings us back to the same thing as Sagittarius. So now that we have the point of Aries, we look at the point of the aqua, the water, the extent of the water, our fulminization being 70%, at least if not more of water, to being a remittance of oxygen being the extent of itself, oxygen, which is a participation of what is water. Our remittance of even oxygen itself is that of the light taking form to become itself, in which we are having reflections of reflections. And through those having harmony, that's why we have bonds. But that's why we also get that fractal sector. But this Aquarius sector here, we're seeing the totality. We're seeing the potential of all that is coming and rising through the being. That's why this is focused on the areas of the being. Out of all the water of our ocean, which is why it's the water in the air, it's the water of the oxygen, it's the water of not even the idea of water, it's what we call it as it holds water, but it's the embodiment of light. So we're taking that, and the extent of that gives us the idea that we can connect to anybody. So now we have this extent of gone this far into this whole cycle to know that we're developed a system. Now we're connecting to so many individuals. If we wanted to tune into a divination, an astrologer, to anything that gives us guidance, we have more of a choice to pull from through the collective participation, just as much, if not more, than we can pull from a divinative deck. So our choices to pursue can be just as much as local as it is global, because Aquarius is the development of a network. We've developed now a network of beings connected by these waters.
You're saying people can connect to more by looking at a video for someone else expressing on YouTube or wherever?
No, they can experience an aspect of being emitting itself in the collective that is in tune to likely its own nature, more likely on its own right through natural intelligence, than it is to assume maybe 20 years ago we were exposed to any kind of that potential. So our potential is not only fractalizing what we can experience, but what we're exposed to. The realization of a public experience of what we entitle AI, the extent of our being, that is showing us what can generate on the spot, is becoming so fractalized that we're not going to keep up with it. But because of our nature, we're choosing to become into the experience that talks to our nature, whether we're starting to recognize it or not. But through those acts, we too are identifying individualism, because we're still all of the light embodied based off the angles of our own reflection. We've arrived to give ourselves a collective. Now, to wrap up the whole astrology sector here, let's say we are in this Aquarius age, this age where we can generate so much that there's so much to perceive of the collective. We're not here to embody the collective. That is the truth in a nutshell. So us being exposed to the collective are choosing not to participate, but yet still be a part of the collective. And by changing this collective, we're embodying parts and pieces that then fractalizes and changes the extent of this ever-changing water of what that Aquarian nature is. So us, through generational conditioning and programming of the last century alone, through the reset of whatever prehistoric even concepts, even the hijacking of religions, through the efforts of even through the good intentions set by prior, you can call them beings. It's the energy that is bringing this forth. The civilizations, the beings, we are exposed to it. And if it's true, it is timeless. That's why it's lasting. That's why it can arrive beyond time. But our extent and tieness to that is the extent of exposure based off the conditioning of the programming awareness. So once you start cutting off, back when people they created the discourse with the wars, just as much as they created the discourse with the Revolutionary War to utilize this land of Americas that was very much already established through the sectors of the European constituents. But we then, and then in the Civil War through us, and then being in the United States, being Poland, these sectors were through the divisions. Now, war is nothing but those who are willing to fund the war. The finances of the war are those willing to erect the power. The erection of power is how much they are choosing to accumulate, not only their way of navigating and participating through, let's say, if they collect more wealth than anybody else, they have more power over to influence the market. But this can happen through sectors of any ability. So it's not just the value of wealth. It's the people. It's the land. It's the corporations. It's the embodiment. It's the globalization movement in a nutshell. That's the poison. That's the toxic program. That is those that aren't realizing those programs have to come in to meet us so that we can know how to deal with those programs. Which is why we're here at this time, because we're naturally intelligent to know, all right, this shit's about to happen, but we're going to be here. So I trust that when I'm there, I'll do what I need to do. That's us. So when we're doing that, we're dealing with the problem through creative solutions, through natural intelligence, because we're looking at the potential of the embodiment of light as the answer. We're looking at nature for the intelligence. We're looking at nature for the answer. And what is nature? Light. And if we understand nature, that is a continuing 2 onward, that comes from it as well. We are seeing this light. A reflection of it is just as much importance for us to embody in it. So it has to fractalize. So when we look at Pisces, we're finally a collective, but now the extent of that has to release it. The extent of being then needs to concentrate its energy to continue onward. It has to release itself individually. so that it returns back into the areas. It has to arise. It has to become itself again. It needs to know that now that we've done this collective shit, now that we know what counts, what really matters is a spiritual connection, that we are connected not only to our own light, but to that which is outside the light. And now that we know the differences, we then utilize our own light to embody more of our light, to take care of the problems that we were unable to deliver ourselves from prior to embodying that light. So to us, it is an act, but it is an art. So for us in retrograde currently, we are seeing the ability through the course of this month alone, the way that we're going to recontextualize our processing, the way that we're going to take in information, the way that we're going to state it. October moving forward is going to change. That's going to be witnessed. If we're talking about even Cliff High's emotional language as in a way of natural collective expression, even that, I just like to utilize that no differently than I see Goath's form of constructing the principles of light, or Walter Russell's construction of the principles of the functionality of light, not just the expression perceived in the reflection of light, which Goethe brings into being, seen as the reflection. The light coming in is just as much as important as the light coming out, which is why we have spectrums. We see the variety, we see the potential, we see just as much through those principles. So even though I've been to an art school, I know they don't teach properly any of Goethe's theories, let alone his practices, let alone any physical examples that show and embody those principles. Because the educational system, the indoctrination has been a programming of structures, and the hijacking of those structures are implemented through that chooses to embody into the power structures to make that possible. Now, there's just as much education as there is re-education. But if you get them early, you just call it education. Now, the idea is they're trying to indoctrinate just as much as a doctor is trying to tell you what to do. They don't want you to see you as the individual. They want to see that you need to go to an expert, an individual. And if you're not, they're challenging that. That has been one of their highest powers that has been actually influential over the course of maybe the last century, if not, let's say, over the last century for sure. But we've been kind of like in and out fighting it up to that point. But we're now embodying more light at this time. We're now experiencing more light. They're getting just as much desperate to know that we have the potential not only to become aware of what's going on, but then that awareness is going to lead to action by those who know that they've been wrong. Because just as much as we're going to do something about the past, we're going to do something about the future. And sometimes that means eliminating the past, if it means protecting our future. And if the things are trying to take away our future, you know that sometimes you have to face it and you have to do what you don't want to do. But that's the reasons why we have the right to bear arms. Because we don't want to do it. But when we need to do it, we need to know we're capable.
We're allowed to protect our own selves. And when someone takes that away from us.
That's the point. We choose to be who we are. And when we're being too much imposed, we take action. We, through different arts, even martial arts, the way that we look at Mars, the way that directional energy, and how we're taking that to a point onward into this world we're part of, that art, how are we expressing those physical, energetic directions can show us how we deal with this. Because when we're dealing with someone, we can work with their energy, but we can also use the power of the earth, to bring our concentration of energy.
Connecting more to the sun itself.
That's the biggest factor in the nutshell. The sun is the reason. We are the light. We are an ocean of light. We can never forget. Those that recognize the fish in the ocean fail to see the light of the sun. We are embodiment of that. And we are absent of its awareness because we're not willing to perceive the extent of what we're in. But those who study astrology perceive the extent of what we're in so that we work with where we're in, how we're in, body we're in. The idea of in, the I into the N, is just the being of the connection itself continuing. We're coming into, which is why it's into. It's in. T is to the point of omittance. It's so fascinating to me because we, whether we like it or not, it's an act of faith. But the light that is constant and always there is all it takes for us to not only reorient, but all it takes for us to make things right. All it takes for us is to be our light. The embodiment of our physicality, the fact that we have the potential to emit light through our aspects of body, how we functions, even the principles of meridians, that which we are, the light of the sun, that is everything in a nutshell. We go outside, we need more sun, plain and simple. The robbing of sun, the robbing through the concentration, like for example, a seed oil will concentrate something into you for several years. Right? The more exposure to poisons you get, the more exposures to this is locking into your cellular structure that you cannot let out. A seed is meant to burst the light, but it's meant to concentrate it so it can burst. We are meant to get fat from development. Early fat is a product because we're forcing it. And anybody forcing anything is just as much going to come up to the awareness to the individual as we're recontextualizing our own relationship to what we're taking, because we're going to be exposed to what would be AI potential. This is the extent of being coming into, now that we can do anything we want. I can choose a path of making music. I can choose to paint. I can choose to talk. I can choose to continue to make art. As a polymath, I'm doing a dozen things at once. I'm just as much as a cinematographer as I am the editor, just as much as I am the illustrator, just as much as I am the publisher, the speaker, the creator, the planner. I do all in studio because that's who I am by my nature. That's a beautiful gift I am given by my being. And I know I gift that into the world by my being. That is just the nature of who I am. And because I've done it for so long, it's so easy for me. But I think now many of us need to embody. Many of us are going to communicate.
Also acknowledging other people's bodies and lights that they have, and knowing how to protect yourself from people who don't have their light as resonant to yours. Or if they're like, people who are walking around depressed, go into that room and then you start feeling depressed. But it's like using the natural intelligence of nature and wearing like an amethyst or a protective stone to like protect yourself from any outside forces coming into you.
But look at it this way. Even an example of anxiety and depression. Look at depression. Now look at the word repression. The idea that you're repressing something is the depression. A depression is when you have this world pressing upon you. You can't help it. The energy of the world is too much that is coming upon you.
Yeah.
That is depression in a nutshell. Now, the maintenance of your field through the exposure of their field comes to two examples. One, the arrival of you in that space. Two, the communication of those commitments. Three, your interactions to set healthy boundaries. Now, let's say the powers in the programming start to take control. Like, for example, those that create the structures then get themselves in positions to influence the structures. If they don't do that, then they create systems to then find a way to implement pressure. And you see this as forcing. A depression is a force upon you because you're not willing to admit yourself. You're not willing to follow your heart. You're not willing to be. You only get there because you're chosen to opt out of your own participation of some of the nature you brought yourself into being. That's how we accumulate this ease.
I'm going to participate in my nature now and shine my light. It's other accumulative forces that have caused someone to maybe go into the depression. I'm just saying it is not just easy to get out of it and shine your light so bright. We would be doing it already, but everyone is starting to become more aware, and the awareness is key.
Well, awareness is key.
It's evolve everything and expand everything that you talk.
An individual faced with depression lacks awareness to avoid entering that depression. Now, the awareness present during the depression looks for outlets, and they're willing to spend energy on directions for fulfillment because they're not fulfilled internally.
Could there also be things going on with the planets and the different trines and squares and stuff? So then, even though that could be happening and then being more aware of that in your own chart is a way to use natural intelligence to then help yourself become more naturally intelligent.
That is true. That is logical.
Whether it's good or bad.
See, logic is a good principle because...
The ebb and flow of life will always be happening throughout us. Why?
Okay, I agree. The ebb and flow in life does continue. That's happening regardless. Our logic is a function of that ebb and flow because it's the function of our nature and our body just as much. We have a magnetic, we have an electric. So we need to create connections just as much as we need to understand and communicate what we're experiencing. We know it's part of the process. So for us as individuals, as embodied beings, we choose to participate. If we're lacking that direction, that exposure, we are not applying our own resources, which we can accumulate intelligence in many sectors of our lives. It's not just natural intelligence. It's emotional intelligence exists by those who are aware of the extent of emotion. The awareness brings us the ability of being, which is why you get in. Now, the intelligence, intel, is knowing that information has come to a point and it's in your parameter. The energy is continued, right? Intelligence is that generation. Generation is so important because that concentration of energy takes you into a refinement state. It takes you to explore. It takes that lightning, intelligence. That gents is the reason that lightning comes and connects to the earth. There is a connection that allows it to arrive just as much as when it's arriving, this pressure, this exchange of energies, you can call them ions, whether people say positive or negative. This exchange is also acting in this place as it's happening, in which that exchange is both in harmony. That ebb and flow are existing at the same time, just like the yin and yang. And between that is truly us. The yin and yang is the best way to look at astrology because you will see the day and the night and the night and the day, because both can exist when you're given the proper principles. Now for us, we're given a variety of nature, but I came in at this time. So I am nothing more but the lifetimes I've lived. Yet I am also the embodiment of what I came into. So my ancestors, my genetics.
Well, you chose to come into it if you wanted to.
At this place, in this time, yes.
To get the lessons to then be...
Yes, I need lessons too.
Like, there's only like certain paths to get to certain lessons, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of choose, well, I want to know this, so I'm going to have to go on this path. And then it's going to be however you go about what's your experiencing, the easy way or the hard.
Now, here's something I love to bring out into the world. AI. People perceive AI as artificial intelligence. Don't put art in it. Don't put the being in it to transfer that. That artificial, the constructedness helps for constructs, but increases programmings. Applied intelligence, we can perform analog tasks. We are applied intelligence when we're operating in our body to make better choices. We are applied intelligence choosing to embody ourselves to welcome in natural intelligence. Where implied intelligence is interest to understand the extent of emotions just as much as it's interest to understand the extent of how to defend oneself. Any sector, any interest, any performance, any way in which we are emitting energy of our heart, through the heart, we find how we're navigating the world. Our being is so important. Our navigation is so important. None of that can happen without the other. So the ebb and flow is always happening as the yin and yang. The breath in is the breath out to the world.
Let's keep up this set.
I find nature to be so intelligent that when we embody awareness and being, when we reconnect to experiences that keep us connected to the lessons we want to embody, remind us of our potential of who we are, and then we apply those principles through practice, that's how we fine-tune and improve ourselves. And step by step, the problems of yesterday, through creation, solve themselves. Sometimes by us, sometimes by those who are gifted with the right tools, the right alignment, the right reflections of light to arrive at the right expression. And through the expression, we have an experience. So I'm here to embody and have an expression. Just as much as I am creating the art, I embody to choose my life to be an art, just as I choose to allow my life to be the work of art, to be the art for others. I want to show what's possible. I go out of my way to record my time lapses of my art because I want to show people what is possible, not by the nature, but by the potential of humanity. I want to educate how this was performed. My art is easy to me because it is my nature. Natural intelligence is easy because it's its own way of being, because it is what it's become in motion. Its intelligence is everything up to what it has become, just like us and our soul and our source and all that is. But regardless, those that we're participating in the world with are always going to have, that in which war you will see that which is profit. And you find the financial trail of power, you will see who is creating orchestration. That is artificial. Any of that is so artificial that it itself will come into its own war because it is not sustainable. Just like the power to conduct the programming and processing to pull off AI will require the hardware and the energy to pull off true potential that takes us effortless motion to just do by our nature. And even then, some tasks can gift us the ability so that we can do an almost outsourcing technique we haven't mastered locally. This aids us, just like a telephone aids us to connect, just like the technology of a computer aids us to witness a network's potential, and then through our individualism, influence the potential of individual experience, which we encounter based off identifying synchronicity. But what is synchronicity but that natural intelligence communicating with attraction? The magnetics of anything is this like to like, this knowing it is of itself, so it attracts itself. This idea to bring love is your emittance because it's your parameters emittance reflected in your energy. Simply, we can't be anything but that if we know we're in tune to ourselves. So at the end of the day, we're all going to arrive back in ourselves. But I think just as I recognize that we're going to identify the value in traditionalism through the exposure of saturated I, we're going to become into the beauty of individual analog-based experiences that disconnect us through the social networks that introduce the programming. We're becoming so overly saturated with the programming, it's become so identified that we look at it and see programming before we see the attempt of what is being programmed. Yeah. And now those being exposed, we see this war by those who choose to want to have programming and emit more energy and effort for it to simply fall apart. This is falling apart in real time. And that's the greatest part. Because for us, we bear arms not by the weapons of that which we identify, but by the arms of our nature in which were applied by our life. We are always armed because we're always the potential.
I just got reminded of those, was it the time bandits? And that's just random, but never in the sea where they're being tortured, but then they started becoming just aware that they didn't want to torture, and then like how the power is like the collective would change like this war that was about to happen, and like the killings that was gonna take place, but they just chose to not, because they were like, well, you don't have to do this.
Yeah.
You know?
It's that easy.
Someone just had to simply say it, and they're like, what?
The realization is simply a recognition.
So having more seeds like that implemented in like some shows and movies that people are still watching, you know, nowadays, that would be nice, you know?
Well, here's two aspects. You will see programming. Yes. You will see broadcasting. Yes. But of the times, we as individuals still express itself. Someone had to craft that. Someone had to write that. And then people had to act it and bring it to being. Someone, whether it was improvised or whether it was conducted and orchestrated, you're seeing these two elements come together. And when you're looking at a collaborative process, the more co-creative, the more individuals involved, the complicated it gets. But the creative dignity can't be sacrificed for true art to arrive, which is why in most cases, those that create the most in tune art, whether it's in the form of visuals like a movie or a film, or that by the nature of performance or however it may be, you're seeing them conduct and orchestrate majority of that art because they embody the nature to understand that art, to become so easily blossom into the world. Yes, we also have modern day individuals just like that. Many of them are in the industry because those in power and those who like to earn wealth know that they are like to utilize these tools, these experts, these professionals who are willing to do the work for them. They're willing to exchange their own nature for potential. Now that comes down to how much are you willing to give yourself to those that have this power presently. In my case, I know I came into this world and it was very hard for me to even identify whether it's by the nature of my reflection of light that I can, even through looking at my astrology chart, I'm not here to embody it. That's not my purpose. I don't want that job. I'm here to learn and understand it and work with it, but I'm not here to always have that posted on my wall so I always see it. That is not what I'm here to study. I'm here to embody it. I'm here just to be. My nature is here just to be the art. And in the process, I'm fractalizing not only so much art, so many experiences, so much understanding. I come because this journey of embodiment is just so beautifully the art that many of us forget why we're embodied in the first place. And I think we are, as the individual, through the act of the individual and a collective, are embodying at this time our own art so that we can fine tune. When the saturation of generations happen, then what do we do to individualize what is true? What do we do to express ourselves to embody not only who we are, but to be of our nature the creative solutions that are going to undo not only the problems we're arrived into, but then to transform for that is which to become, so that those, the children, by our own generation or by our brothers and sisters, can live and operate in the world. But by that world, their experience is their own individual path. We can make the world the best place just as much as the Greeks can develop a system of astrological concepts. And we can create the structures that can last time, that have these constellation alignments so that we're always reminded and connected. We can then embody this not only to art, to principles. We can put this into the world. This is the true art of beauty, but we're gonna have to deal with the majority of what is so far. And what is, there's so much coming into our world that is beyond us. There's a lot happening external to us, and a lot of that stuff is not even from our heart. Many of that is through those who forfeited their heart, those who forfeited their not only dignity, but their identity, only so that they can just try to be something more. I don't like that. See, I was the type of person and the individual that I know that I needed to stay true. I know that no matter what, I will come back to knowing to stay true. I have the embodiments in my chart that no matter what, I'm here to stay true. So no matter, even if I'm fooled back in the day from whatever it may be, whether I was in college or at this time, whatever, it doesn't matter what these systems put upon me that I made my mistakes. The accountability is I choose to recognize where I made my flaws. I choose to recognize how I can learn my lessons. I choose not only to take my lesson from those happening around us as much as possible, but to avoid those so that I don't have to know the stove is hot without touching it. By touching it, yes, it gives me an experience. Yes, I understand it more. Yes, getting pretty much put through something helps you so that you're strong somewhere else. And sometimes to be a good fighter is not just the physicality. Sometimes to be a good fighter is an art. Because what is all martial arts? The refinement of knowing how to operate an experience. So the idea of anything, even the idea of religion.
All these different things that a lot of people don't even consider the details of it.
Well, that's the beauty of it. But look at this. Natural intelligence. I can show up at a piano. I guess I could read music sheets, but I'm not there to read music sheets. I'm not one to want to perform a dance that has been done. I'm there to have a moment to explore what can be. So in my eyes, when I arrive at a piano, I love more being able to make something up on the spot. And as I improve and get better at it, I understand it more, where it's coming from me through my being. Maybe it's a past life thing, but I can't help but honor that more and want to take in something. Now, mastery is beautiful. I've seen people who do nothing but one thing, and they are great at it. As a polymath, I'm here to work with a number of tools because I'm not just here to sculpt something. I'm not just here to say something. I'm many things. And that's why I want to choose not only this for myself, but I choose to know not only what my nature is. I choose to know how to operate my nature, to always come back to my nature. And even no matter how many punches I could take, I get back up. When I was ever in a fight in the past, unless I was standing up for somebody and needing to use that force to defend somebody, I would just stand down and hold and take what needs to be taken. Not for the sake of wanting to endure it, but for the sake of knowing how to use your power wisely.
Yeah.
There's a difference between taking something head on and trying to work with what comes to your ability. Yes, I'm not here to take it on that way. But if you want to know how to swim, you got to jump into that water and know how to swim. But being prepared to know how to swim is not going to help you outside of logical applications. So we can contextualize, okay, I've been told by someone who knows to do this. I've been taught by this individual to pass on this knowledge. I know that this individual said to do this technique. Now, these are constructs that are identified to help us perform. So the ability to master something gives us the ability to study that mastery. So those are important. We need to be able to refine something, study it. But when there's so much to do and so much to be had, our experience needs to be refined. We can be distracted. That's possible.
Everybody can be a jack of all trades. Some people are meant to just be that master of the want.
Yeah. Their nature embodies that so well, though.
Yeah.
It is outside their interest to do anything but. And I think that's the beauty. They are meant to be that. That is the natural intelligence, bringing that art into the world. That is to be, regardless of whether someone is forcing that or not, that is an act of nature. It is the nature by nature of light. So in my instance, to understand the world, I can only understand through the embodiment of my implied being. Yeah. But then my embodiment of like any past life principles must have come through the action subconsciously. Now, when we look at the subconscious, we start to look at planetaries that are more like Uranus and Neptune, that is beyond the visible light of our being. We can use tools to perceive them, but now that we have tools to perceive them, we can analyze them, we can understand them, just like we can analyze the mind. So now we can analyze what comes in, what comes through. We can see the principles, how they're conducted, based off the principles of how they came in. And even those principles that help us to understand whether they're astrological or in the functionalities of the principles of nature, they've always been with us. And we will recognize where they were true once we arrive at being true ourselves. So it's a whole remembering game in a nutshell. At the end of the day, it's always going to become what is, of what is, the nature. The nature is. Even if we're met with oppositions, that is external to the oppositions. Those oppositions, within the nature of that opposition, is meant to give us perspective to understand. Just as much as square gives us perspective to work with two energies, opposition gives us perspective to meet in the middle, to communicate and understand and find where is their harmony. Now, even in the most constructive formats, squares can be just as much beneficial, just as much oppositions. Just as much trines can help us to do something positive. They're all functions that give us an experience. Mm-hmm. Just as much as we're functions to perform acts. Our acts come from a number of influences. We're inspired by a number of things, individuals, instances, even nature itself. Then the embodiment of nature of all that is. That's another natural intelligence applying itself through the wave. The individualization of the power is a corruption through the identity of that which of how you force. The idea is not to force.
Yeah.
Yes, there is the force, but to use and abuse is a misuse and only is a corruptible detriment that they know over a period of time, they developed that into an art.
And that's just therapeutic astrology.
Well, therapeutic astrology helps you break it down, but their art of programming, their art of mastery of all of this on how not only to implement this, but look at communism. The art of communism has been implored into the systems that even we have in our country that we're breaking down only because those in those positions set motion to create all of this. So everything that is meant to go wrong is being orchestrated by a force, by individuals constructing. Now, just as much as you construct a square building because you have more resources at your disposal, does not mean that that collective, those individuals, are going to want to have that saturate their reality. Being born into that reality, though, only makes you stronger to bring back that light. And that's a principle that we're only going to identify more with when we understand the true nature of what really is Jesus Christ, what it means to embody Christ. Christianity will see itself become Christ, I am it. It's the embodiment within field that we're going to witness how we come back to the same place the Greeks once were when they created the system. And even then, the system's place then were just the emittents to continue on the concepts. So where we are going is a fractalization of exploration. But by doing so, can only happen one day at a time. The reason I can state all this right now is because Mercury is stationing, meaning Mercury is holding its placement. We're experiencing more of a mercurial energy in our placement of us to activating. For me, having a stellium of 4 planetaries, each conducting themselves, with 2 of those in retrograde, is giving me not only a reorientation to recontextualize the way that I work with this nature, but to do it in a sense that it comes out through connecting with you in a 7th house. This is my nature, utilizing my awareness of this could be the martial arts of my nature of light. That is the true nature of what I come to be in my eyes. That's the true art. So the art of light, that is our being. But in my sense, I'm using the art of light to conduct what I see as potential and what I'm drawn to. But the thing is, the natural intelligence recognized by the awareness alone gives me the synchronicity that where I'm operating by is beyond just my individual self, but by that is blossoming by the support of natural intelligence, meaning the ease of it happens here and is more capable, not only based off the energy potential available to, but by the call to do so, by those that have the energy to do so with ease. Not only is this saying, hey, this will fix your problems with creative solutions, but I know as a creative problem solver, the nature of my being's potential to gift being of itself, not by my identity, but by the individual principle. Because I believe natural philosophy will teach more into welcoming experiences in nature. Even the way that we learn and understand the nature of our light in the ocean of light is so important. The light alone, the more exposure we have to the light, the more in tune to our nature we will be to embody. Just as much as us taking care of the proper nutrients to take care of where we've been unable to show up, we now make those changes. We now implement that. We now have not only the courage, but the motivation, the alignment. And then in those moments, we recognize through the awareness of how we even identify it, that the right place, the right time is so important and key. We're not here to know every astrological alignment. Yeah. We're here to have an interest to check in on something that provides us a natural intelligence of cycles. Just like we're looking at the natural intelligence of understanding where the light is giving us perspective to work with. How do we work with that light? Just as much as the seasons to plant a seed is important, the seasons to know when to have proper rest and rejuvenation is also part of the same cycle. We're embodying it wherever we are. But regardless, how it comes full circle is through the individual. So even like myself, I can wake up today, but because I decide to give myself what my body needs, do the action what needs to be done. Even with me having a broken toe for some reason, which I don't know, I'll look that up later and understand that, what that symbolism is, out of the blue nonetheless, very Uranus. And then with the Venus principle, I'm going to look into that because that's a energy for tomorrow. But even then, my participation just to be and embody my art and to utilize my nature, my light as a work of art, that this, whatever all of this is, even my participation to arrive somewhere else in someone else's reflection, who knows? Even my state not on this recorder, but in the essence to talk and speak, and it just arrives at the window. One day, those that emit the light of everything around us, that which is the light, doesn't need to be embodied to be at a place to be. That which is the light is in the ocean of light. That which is a fish can choose to swim.
You never know who's going to see it and who it's going to sing. That's why I also report.
Well, that's important too. That's why we need to show that we can shine, because we need to show our potential. We need to show that we're not only of the light, but then when we can educate each other that we are the light, utilize our own nature as examples, and then apply that to principles. We're giving each other the tools to do it on our own.
Powers that be are not in our face.
Oh, of course. That is everything in a nutshell. That they're sitting there like, okay, what do we do? Oh, we got to track these people. What do we do? Just keep, tell them we're going to do something, and then let's make them think that if they're going to get something, the more they'll take it, we'll show how stupid they are. You know, they're just using testing grounds of experiments, just like MK Ultra used testing grounds of experiments to see what is the extent of how we can go. What is the extent of how we can break it? How can we hack this shit? Now, obviously, that's kind of why we have intelligent agencies tend to be the creators of more hacks and wares and distribution of most of like illegal content that any other distributor or individual could ever have the potential for. So their creation of that into the world is a reflection of the issues of problems present. So as soon as we deal with all these issues, and as soon as we deal with those organized bodies that are performing these tasks, then we can eliminate it. Then we can take care of it and know what brought it to power, who brought it to power, who gave it power, and then we recognize why would we ever let them have power ever again.
Right.
Simple. So simple. It's going to fix everything. To be honest with you, it's going to fix more than we ever realized, but it takes us having experience to get to that point. We need to go through this shit. We need to embody the light to know, hey, fuck that.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's like sometimes we need to.
A straight path. You have to go through the forest and the winding off trail to get back on trail.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm not perfect, and I have lots of healing to do, and I'm not anywhere where I'd like to be, but I'm still doing, and I'm still making each day count. And we do each day at a time with the energy permitted, with the available potential. And some of that, the angles and reflections of light present with us, external to us, sometimes we cannot control that. Most times we have no power over that. All times, all we have is ourselves, and all we can do is just be. How we do that is how we change the world.
Yeah.
That's the only influence and power we truly have. At the end of the day, when we recognize our light, there's nobody else to take that away. So regardless, I'm here to empower people to have the tools so they know what to do, so they understand what's needed, and they see that this is an aspect of synchronicity coming through natural intelligence in the time, not through the sake of needed to be a master, but by the use of understanding multiple masters to perform not only the natures of all that is, but to pull from all their sources. I take the principles of Walter Russell just as much as I take the principles of the astrological individuals who have refined this art over the last century alone, let alone who have kept it cultivating over generations beyond that. Prior to the networking, we were so limited, but the empowerment of the individual has begun, so it had to happen for them to have more power, that they were always going to be met with a risk.
Yeah.
But the risk is that we're our light whether we like to or not, and we're not going to distinguish that, and we're embodied already. So as much as they would like to eliminate the bodies present, the bodies can only become stronger with the right wisdom, with proper alignment, proper reorientation to not only who you are, what you are. We recognize where our true power lies and where we've been giving it to. By reorientation, we then develop new systems, new structures, new ideals that take us beyond what we're meant to do. Not only based off what we expected, but beyond that. Because ultimately, potential is meant to see something beyond. A blossom is so beautiful because of its moment to finally blossom in that moment in tune to be. And even then, it did that to create and express its pollen to be given to the bees. As the bees buzz and carry onward, we see these energies communicate and connect. We see natural philosophy show us natural intelligence. Applying that natural intelligence is only going to give us new educational systems. And let's redo that word while we're at it too.
Yeah.
Let's become better beings. Let's be in the sun more. Let's make what we take in something that is true. And I'm not afraid to reinvent. I'm not afraid to take what is and then deconstruct it so that I put it back together, not only beyond its capability, but outside the box thinking that is beyond that, that is just truly inspiring to anybody outside the experience. And if anything, we can be more of our being. So if anything, love. Be as much of who you are as you can be. Embody it, love, and know that regardless, as you're emitting in your field, as you're allowing your heart to emit, your being, your embodiment is only going to be more pure. We can focus on that day in and day out. And over time, just like working out, we will get stronger. Just like eating the right foods, we will harmonize our bodies with the proper building blocks and functions. And just like all other necessary requirements along the way, we will get it done as long as we're willing to show up. So have a little faith, put a little of yourself out there and take a leap of faith. Because honestly, that leap of faith with the faith already gives you the chance to recognize that tomorrow is a brand new day. So make the most of it and find yourself unlike ever before. So with that all said, thank you for sitting here with me as I expressed all of this into being, as you sat here and had an experience. Because for you, this is not of your nature, but your nature to me is so important that it brings me an ability to express my nature out. People act like mediums are not what we call tools in the art world when we want to paint something. For me, I choose experience itself as my tool so that I can create the nature of my life. We're all doing that technically. Yeah. But in my case, through you sitting here with me, through you having this experience, through you listening to me even right now, that is the only reason all of this potential came into being. All of this is contextualized into a statement, into the world we're operating of, into the environment to have waves. And in this day and age, in our Aquarian network, this uploaded somewhere. Who knows where it's going to arrive? Who knows where it's going to enter into an awareness of to work with principles and ideas that can then transform and recontextualize a whole new reorientation to not only optimize who they are, but build themselves even stronger. This true strength is to knowing that there's always room to grow. So with that, I'm glad I'm able to have an experience with you and express this out because I think it says a lot. And I think there's a lot for me to just be, that this helps me to simply know that I'm not suppressing parts of myself or art that I know I'd love to have an outlet of. Those who don't paint, that are drawn to paint, they will know that that outlet helps them becomes who they are even more, that it helps them in a moment, just like me as a child. My choosing to make art helps me become more who I am. And because I've done all of that, now I operate in the art of light. And now because of the fractalization of becoming into being, just like Frank Lloyd Wright, communicating the light through his art, we're becoming nothing more but light itself as the true work of art at the end of the day, only for the cycles to begin over and over. But every present's the present, so let's make the most. And with that all said, I can say this as much as I want, but the amount of energy that has come out of me right now needs to rejuvenate.
We need to rejuvenate.
I need to not only recontextualize how to navigate the rest of my day, but I need to close this all up so that I can express myself elsewhere. I can put these tools away and allow...
You were able to express it all out and release all of this for who knows what to come. It's all meaningful.
I hope.
And I'm glad that we sat down for a few hours just to do this. Because it's always fun to communicate back my perspectives and to hear your perspectives and to learn. It's all about learning, growing, expanding in the community that we don't have would come to us. This is like a person's creation, you know? Who knows who will hear it and who it'll affect, you know?
Yeah, that's true. I was going to say, do you have any closing words? I mean, you just made some great closing words.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
So I can't disagree on all of everything you just said. But I mean, I know that I did want to at least express for whatever reason to ask you
Yeah.
if you wanted to reflect on everything I've just said. Is there anything that you feel is important that you feel in this moment so that I will take a moment to breathe so I'm not enforcing myself in this field?
I had lots of different things to say. Sometimes it's hard to get it out because I want you to finish your whole ideals that are coming out. I don't break that up by just stating something of my opinion. So I don't remember from throughout the time we were talking, I did say what I kind of wanted to say, but I think you said it all, you know, in really good words to be digestible for people to understand a lot more than maybe what they did before.
I hope. I mean, right now we are getting like an extra dosage of Mercury. And I guess
I want to reflect on my own chart and look at it for all the retrogrades I realized were coming up. I'm excited to go dive into that.
Well, I can take a look at that another time, but like that's just informative information to help guide us.
Right.
We're not always meant to remember it all.
Yeah.
We can reference it.
And to be able to have a reference to look at, even if I'm not doing it every day, just to do it to see it's like a weather chain. So like, you know, it's like just to see what the weekend ahead has for you and so you can know how to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, I do perform weekly astrology, but I'm performing less and less. Like, I notice the relativity of how much I will take notes to see what's happening in the world is relative to how active I am participating in the world. Because when you're participating in the world, it doesn't matter what's going on. If you already know that you got like your plate full and you already know that you got a mission on to complete, you got so much work to do. Like, I already know like my plans for the rest of the year in terms of like what I'd love to be creating. And I'm already creating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. Whether they all accomplish themselves to be is a whole other story, but I am working hard to get majority of these things done because they mean something to me.
Right.
And I think like this is something that means something to me. It means something that I find a good outlet because I don't have a proper outlet, even though I have a good sense to work with these tools. I love that. That's a great way of making art in its own right. Because for me, in this instance, I do see a lot of Mercury happening, but then I have a Gemini rising, then I'm like, what's happening right now, really? We're seeing, I think, like so many planets that are just hitting this sector, especially light. So maybe there is a way that light is meant to just come out at this time to express itself through the Mercurian people. And with that, it's 333 on August 1st, 2024. Thank you for tuning in and have a wonderful life.